So I've been wanting to make these on the channel for ages, but I've always found some excuse not to do them. But finally, after 6 weeks of no job and complete isolation, I managed to find a tiny gap in my schedule. Ages ago, I made macaroons with croissant crumbs and they were stunning. And back then I did play around with the idea of doing the same thing but with sourdough crumbs instead. But you know how these things are, other things got in the way and that idea went on the back burner. But it's finally here, and I know with all that sourdough you've been baking, you've got some spare knob ends and crust lying around that were only good for the birds anyway. So gather them up and let's get going. The first thing we need to do is prepare the sourdough crumbs for our macarons. So take your end piece of sourdough, if it's a few days old or completely stale, even better. Slice it up and you're going to need about 150 grams. Cut the slices into small cubes, about a centimetre big, but don't stress too much about this, they don't need to be perfectly uniform. Once they're all cut up, put them to one side. Place a saucepan over a high heat and add 50 grams of butter. Stir until the butter begins to brown. This is just to add a little extra flavour to our macarons. Then turn off the heat and add the cubed sourdough and toss everything together, making sure all the bread is coated in that brown butter. Then spread them out onto a tray and bake them in the oven at 160 degrees for about 30 minutes, tossing them around halfway through until they are rich, deep golden brown and super crispy. Then transfer them to a tray lined with kitchen paper or a cloth just to remove any excess fat and leave them to cool completely. Once the sourdough is completely cooled, place into the bowl of a food processor and blitz to fine breadcrumbs. About 10 seconds should do, don't overdo it or they'll just become an oily paste. Then remove from the food processor and place into a bowl. So this is what we're going to be using in place of ground almonds in our macaroons. You'll probably have more than you need, so carefully measure out 90 grams of sourdough crumbs and add it to 120 grams of icing sugar. You can keep the rest in an airtight container and use them another time. Place the icing sugar and sourdough crumbs back into the bowl of a food processor and blitz for another 10 seconds. Once again, don't overdo this. You don't want a paste, you're just mixing the two together and making sure the crumbs are nice and fine. Once blitzed, transfer the mix into a sieve and push it through with a spoon. This will help obtain a really nice smooth consistency to our macaroons. Once all the dry ingredients have been sieved, put them to one side while we get these macaroons started. Place 75 grams of egg whites into a bowl and add a pinch of salt. Then, using an electric whisk, beat the whites slightly just to break them down. Then add 50 grams of caster sugar and whisk again to a really stiff and glossy meringue. There shouldn't be loads of volume to this, so don't be surprised if it doesn't act like your normal meringue. We want a little density here, not a light airy pavlova. And this takes time, about 4 or 5 minutes, so don't worry about over whisking. This is highly unlikely with the sugar already in there. So don't skimp on the whisking. When you think it's done, give it another 30 seconds just in case. Once you have a thick glossy meringue that's holding stiff peaks and the impression of the whisk in the bowl, add the icing sugar and sourdough crumb mix. Then, using a rubber spatula, fold the dry ingredients into the meringue and continue to fold them until the mixture starts to loosen and is able to hold a ribbon. Now at this stage you can overwork the mixture, so be a little cautious. We want it loose enough so that when we pipe our macaroons, they spread just slightly and create that nice smooth top. If we don't fold it enough at this stage, we're going to end up with little peaks on top of our macaroons and ruin any chance of that classic smooth shell. But if we overwork it, we end up with a mix that spreads too thin, creating these flat little crispy macaroons. This might take a little bit of practice if this is your first time, but you'll soon figure it out. If you can draw a figure of 8 with your ribbon, you should be good to go. Now place the macaroon mixture into a piping bag fitted with a 1 cm plain piping nozzle. Then pipe the mixture into 2.5 cm rounds onto a tray lined with a silicone mat. Use this pipe and twist technique to minimise the peaks on top of the macaroons, and this should make about 2 large trays. Once you've piped all the macaroons onto your trays, gently tap each one on a tea towel just to level out those macaroons and help bring any big air bubbles to the surface. Now it's just a light tap, mind you, don't drop it from some great heights. An inch or two of the table will be just fine, and the tea towel will stop it from bouncing around. Then leave them out at room temperature to dry out and develop a skin on top. This is what's going to give them that lovely smooth finish. These ones took about 45 minutes, but it will depend on your environment. If it's humid where you are, expect it to take longer. Once you can touch these macaroons without them sticking to your fingers, they are ready to go. Just be gentle here, a light touch will go a long way to not ruining those macaroons at the final hurdle. Place the macaroons into a preheated oven at 160 degrees for 10 to 12 minutes until set and risen with that beautifully smooth top and that nice little foot on the bottom. Then remove the oven and leave the macaroons to cool completely on the baking sheet. Once cooled, these macaroons are ready to go. If you're not using them until later, you can store them in an airtight container for a couple of days, but they also freeze really well. Personally, I would get them filled and eaten as soon as possible. I'm just filling them with a little chocolate cremo. I'll leave a link to the recipe down below, but to be honest, if you want to save yourself some time, just mix together Nutella with some smooth peanut butter and pipe that in. You can thank me later. But if you're more patient than me, you can leave them for a day or two, because once they're filled, they do improve with time. And if there's one thing we have right now, it's time. Patience, not so much. I think I swapped between macaroon and macaron throughout that entire video. Say it however you want, I don't care. Now, who would have thought there were going to be two things that you're going to need to master during this lockdown? Not only sourdough, but macaroons as well. But seriously guys, you need to give these a go, because me explaining how delicious they are just doesn't do them justice. It's up to you. And that is it. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you like this recipe, let me know by hitting the thumbs up down below. And if you're new here and you like what you see, why not consider subscribing as well? Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook. I love to see what you guys are cooking. I've been answering some questions there as well, so if you've got one, feel free to drop me a line. Plus, I have an Amazon storefront now. I've somehow figured out how to do that. If you're interested in any of the equipment I use, you can head over there. There's a link in the description down below. That's it. Thank you so much. I will see you next time. Prime.